morning, the kind of morning you didn't think much about. Quiet, soft, like the air was still waking up itself. The sun had barely begun to push its way through the curtains, casting a pale light over the city that seemed too gentle to be anything but comforting. Tequila Sherpa sat on the edge of her bed, the kind of place that felt familiar, almost sacred in its normality. Her room was small, tucked away at the back of a modest apartment in the heart of the city. There was nothing extravagant about it, just a wooden desk by the window, a few scattered books, and a chair that creaked every time she moved. The walls, though they could have been freshly painted, had gathered a soft layer of dust over the years, a quiet witness to the passage of time. The air was filled with the faint scent of lavender from a candle she liked to burn at night, always lit just before bed, like a little ritual of peace in her otherwise hectic world. Tequila stretched her arms above her head, yawning softly, her movements slow and unhurried, as though savoring each second before the world around her demanded anything from her. The clock by her bed clicked gently, its ticking the only sound in the stillness. It was a sound she could almost hear in her bones, grounding her in the moment. In a world that sometimes moved too fast, this was her time to simply be. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, just like she did every morning. A quick scan of her notifications, a couple of messages from friends asking how she was, a new post from a group chat that had already become part of her routine. She smiled at the screen, tapping a few responses, before finally setting the phone down. No rush, no urgency. Outside, the world was waking up. A soft hum of traffic could be heard, distant, yet familiar. The chatter of voices as people moved through the streets of the city below her window. Her neighbors, she knew, were already getting ready for their day. Mrs. Wong, the elderly woman 2 floors down, was probably sitting at her kitchen table, sipping tea and listening to the news in a language Tequila couldn't quite follow, but it made her feel a little less alone in the world. She got up from the bed and padded across the room, her feet brushing against the cold wooden floor. There was a small kitchen just outside her door. It was nothing special, barely enough space for a sink, a stove, and the small refrigerator she'd inherited when she moved in. She flicked the kettle on and waited, watching the steam curl up from the spout as the water began to boil. The soft hiss of the kettle, the gentle clink of her spoon against the edge of her mug. It all blended together, these small sounds that made up the backdrop of her life. The apartment wasn't large and the city wasn't quiet, but there was something about mornings that made everything feel smaller, simpler, almost as if the day hadn't yet fully come into focus. Tequila sipped her tea slowly, savoring the warmth of it as it settled into her chest. Outside, the sounds of the city were growing louder. The morning rush had begun. She could hear the distant honking of cars, the faint chatter of street vendors setting up their stalls for the day. It was almost like a rhythm, like the city itself was taking a deep breath and preparing to move. She opened her laptop, another part of the ritual. The screen flickered to life, revealing a world of endless tabs and messages. Today, like most days, there was work to be done, small tasks that she had become used to. But for now, she closed the lid, deciding to just enjoy the stillness for a few more minutes. Her mind was calm, her body unworried. As she sat there sipping her tea and watching the light outside slowly shift, a soft smile played on her lips. It wasn't the kind of smile that came from some grand idea or big decision. It was the kind that came from simply being content, And sometimes that was all you needed. The day was waiting, but for now there was no rush, no deadlines, no expectations. Just Tequila in her small apartment on this quiet morning that felt like it could last forever. Outside her window, the city moved as it always did. But here, in this room, time seemed to stretch out in front of her like an open sky. As Tequila set her mug down gently on the table, the soft clink of ceramic against wood was the only sound in the room. The warmth of the tea lingered in her hands as she stood up slowly, the rhythm of her movements calm and deliberate. Outside, the first few rays of sunlight had finally broken through the gray haze of early morning, casting a golden glow across the cluttered desk in front of her. A light breeze, faint but refreshing, slipped in through the half-open window, carrying with it the scent of freshly baked bread from the bakery down the street. She walked over to the window, her bare feet making no sound as they slid across the cool floor. The city outside seemed to pulse in quiet harmony, as if it too was waking up slowly, reluctantly, each building stretching toward the sky, each street coming to life with the whispers of the morning crowd. The hum of traffic below felt distant, almost like the sound of the ocean in a shell, a soft, continuous wave. She let her fingers rest on the sill for a moment, gazing out. A man was jogging down the sidewalk, earbuds tucked snugly into his ears, his pace steady, rhythmic. The sound of his footfalls, thump, 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 echoed lightly in her mind, each step a pulse in the quiet morning. Behind him, a small group of school children huddled together, laughing and shouting as they walked toward the corner, backpacks bouncing with every step. Their voices, bright and unhurried, added a layer of warmth to the coolness of the morning air. Tequila closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the world slip over her. The rustling of leaves, the distant call of a vendor setting up their stall on the corner, the soft hum of the city beneath it all. It was a sound she knew well, one that made her feel grounded in a way she couldn't quite explain. After a few seconds, she turned back into the room and without a word, moved to the small kitchen area. The low hum of the fridge was the only sound as she opened it, the cool air spilling out as she reached for the small jar of honey she kept on the top shelf. She had never been one for sweeteners in her tea, but this morning felt different. A small spoonful of honey melted slowly as she stirred it into her cup, the soft scrape of the spoon against the glass. A quiet, soothing rhythm. She paused, leaning against the counter, her eyes wandering over the small, unremarkable kitchen. There were dishes in the sink, stacked in a neat pile, waiting to be washed. Her gaze shifted to the small potted plant sitting on the windowsill, its leaves slightly drooping, as though it too had been caught in the slow rhythm of the morning. With a soft sigh, she reached out, gently adjusting the plant so it sat upright, more centered in its pot. The rustle of the leaves as she touched them was faint, but oddly comforting, like a quiet whisper. Tequila let her fingers linger for a moment longer before moving back to her seat. The day was still young, still stretching before her like a wide, open canvas. And yet, there was something in the air that felt a little different today, though she couldn't put her finger on it. Maybe it was the light, or maybe it was the quiet way the city was moving, like it was waiting for something too. She sipped her tea again, the warmth of the liquid spreading through her chest, grounding her. The honey had made it richer, smoother, the sweetness faint, but comforting. The little sounds of the room, the soft tapping of her fingers against the ceramic, The rustle of her clothes as she shifted in her seat seemed to fill the space, blending with the sounds of the world outside. The feeling of peace, of stillness, wrapped around her like a blanket. For a moment, everything felt right. Her phone buzzed quietly on the table, the sudden sound sharp, but not unwelcome. She glanced at the screen, her thumb hovering over the notification. It was from a friend. A quick message. "Hey, have you seen the clip Prosperous MMS video trending?" She raised an eyebrow, intrigued, but not particularly moved. She'd seen her friends send these kinds of messages before. Links to viral videos, clips that would come and go in the blink of an eye. But something about the message piqued her interest. Maybe it was the mention of the trending video. Or perhaps it was just the curiosity that often followed a day like today. A day that felt like something new was about to begin. Setting her tea down, she reached for her phone. The quiet swish of fabric against the chair as she moved was the only sound. A soft rustle that seemed to fit perfectly in the calm of the room. Her fingers swiped across the screen, the gentle tap of each letter as she typed her response. "What's it about?" She didn't expect an immediate reply, but a few seconds later her phone buzzed again. The response came quickly. "You'll see. It's got Tequila Sherpa in it. Pretty wild, honestly." Tequila paused. The name struck her like a chord. She had heard that name before. It was the kind of name that stuck with you. Bold, strong, unmistakable. She had seen it in passing, heard it in hushed tones in the city's corners, but she hadn't really thought much of it. Tequila Sherpa. The name seemed to hang in the air for a moment, mixing with the quiet buzz of the city outside. She leaned back in her chair, the soft creak of the wood beneath her weight barely noticeable. Her fingers hovered over the phone again. For some reason, she couldn't quite explain. She felt that little spark of curiosity. There was no rush, no urgency, but somehow she knew that things were about to change. And that change, she felt deep in her bones, was closer than she realized. Tequila stared at the phone screen, her thumb hovering just above the keys, ready to type. The words felt almost too weighty for the moment. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but something about the name, the mention of Tequila Sherpa, a name so similar to her own, stirred a strange, unsettling feeling deep within her. The silence in the room had shifted, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to do something. She tapped at the screen, the soft sound of the notification pinging in her ears as the message opened up. There it was, the thumbnail of a video, a title that made her pause. Clip Plus Mms Deekila Sherpa, Trending Video X. Her heart beat a little faster. She hadn't realized it, but she had been holding her breath. The image on the screen flickered, loading slowly, the circle spinning with a soft, rhythmic whir. A new wave of curiosity washed over her. It was a strange thing, how a name, her name, albeit shared with someone else, could send a ripple of something unidentifiable through her. She should have ignored it, should have just gone back to her tea, to the peaceful quiet of her apartment. But there was something magnetic about it. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the play button. The first thing she saw was the blurry outline of a mountain, steep and vast, stretching into an endless sky. The shot was shaky, as though it had been filmed hastily, but there was a rawness to it, a kind of unrefined energy that pulled her in. The camera zoomed in, revealing the silhouette of a woman in the distance, standing alone against the backdrop of the craggy peaks. Tequila's breath caught in her throat. The woman was wearing a simple jacket, her back to the camera, tightly. Even though her face wasn't visible yet, there was something unmistakable about the posture, the stance. It felt familiar, like a distant memory pressing against her consciousness. The camera continued to zoom in. A gust of wind caught the woman's hair, lifting it slightly. And then, for a split second, Tequila could have sworn that the face that turned toward the camera was hers. Her chest tightened, and she blinked quickly, as if trying to clear her mind. But no, she was sure of it now. The woman in the video looked exactly like her. Not a distant resemblance, not a passing similarity, but exactly like her. The same eyes, the same high cheekbones, the same curve of her lips. But how could that be? Tequila had never been to those mountains, never filmed anything like that. She hadn't even left the city in months. She put the phone down for a moment, her heart racing, her thoughts scattered. The quiet of her apartment felt different now, the stillness somehow more unsettling. She stood up, her legs moving stiffly, and paced around the room. Her hand brushed against the cool surface of the desk, and she paused, her fingers tracing the edge of a book she'd left open the night before. It was a collection of short stories, nothing too special, but her gaze lingered on it, almost like the words inside were offering something she couldn't quite grasp. Was it possible? Could this video be some sort of mistake, some digital trick? Or was it something else? The idea swirled in her mind like a whirlwind, but still, she couldn't bring herself to click away from the video. Instead, she picked up her phone again, watching as the video continued to play, her breath shallow. As the camera zoomed in closer on the woman's face, a soft beep interrupted the silence. Another notification, this one from an unknown number. She hesitated. Her thumb hovered over the message. "Tequila, it's time," it read. "You've been waiting for this moment." The words sent a chill down her spine. She glanced back at the video, the woman now standing still, her face fully revealed. It was still her. There was no mistaking it. A shiver ran down her back as the voice on the video, now faint but unmistakable, whispered something in the wind. A phrase barely audible. "Find the key." The woman in the video tilted her head slightly, as if acknowledging Tequila's presence, though she was on the other side of the screen. Her eyes seemed to lock onto Tequila's in that brief moment, a knowing, unsettling connection between them. Tequila's heart skipped. She felt something in her chest tighten, a mix of dread and curiosity. Find the key. Her mind raced. What did it mean? She put the phone down on the table, but her fingers wouldn't stop trembling. She felt like she was teetering on the edge of something just beyond her reach. The world outside the window had lost its calm, its peaceful rhythm. It was as if the city itself was holding its breath too. Everything in the room, her quiet apartment, her routine, the gentle hum of the fridge, felt out of place now. The normality of it all had cracked, and behind that crack, there was something she couldn't see but felt she had always known was there. Her phone buzzed again. This time there was no hesitation. She reached for it immediately. Another message. This one from her friend, the one who had sent her the first video link. "Are you watching? It's happening. Don't wait too long." The air was thick now. It felt heavy. The room seemed to close in on her, the space shrinking with each breath. Tequila glanced at the screen again, but the woman in the video was no longer standing alone. Now, there were others. Shadows, indistinct figures moving in the distance. But the woman, her doppelganger, was still there, her eyes still locked on Tequila's. message was clear. It was time. But time for what? Tequila stood there, frozen, her mind whirling with questions she didn't have answers to. And yet, beneath it all, a quiet voice whispered that there was something she needed to do, something she had to find, something she had been waiting for, whether she was ready or not. The quiet hum of her apartment, the familiar sounds of the city outside, seemed distant now, like a world that had slipped further and further away. And then, as if the universe itself had decided to step in, the screen flickered. A brief, sudden blink. The video paused. Tequila's heart stopped for a moment. The words on the screen changed. You are not who you think you are. The room seemed to fall silent, and the world, once so quiet and still, suddenly felt too vast,